your gear, let's hit the water. Paddle and fin, where the vibe gets hotter. Kayak fishing, straight talk, hear the stories unfold. Sloppy freshwater adventures bold. With multiple hosts, yeah, the crew's all here. Casting lines in rivers, no need for fear. From the east to the west, we're making waves. Join the tournament hype, see how it raves. Paddle and fin, we're on the go. From the lakes to the oceans, let the good times flow. Fishing tales and triumphs will paint the scene. Jib reviews and profiles, you know what we mean. Bring special guests, every episode shines. This is kayak fishing, where the world aligns.
What is going on, everybody? I'm your host, Adam Prost, and I welcome you to another episode of the River Run Podcast. And this one, we're going to go back a little in history here on this episode. So my guest tonight, he is a Susquehanna River guide. His name is Chris Gorsuch. He is not only a river guide, taking out loads of people for chasing smallmouth on probably one of the biggest smallmouth rivers in North America, but he wrote an article on the origin of the smallmouth story. And before we dive right into this, I'm just going to give you a little run through. I was just kind of on one of those days where I'm like going through reading stuff, and I was like, I started to stumble upon, the stories of river smallmouth and smallmouth bass, and it's actually quite fascinating to think that, they were taken from certain places and they were put in other rivers. And this actually didn't just date back to, 1900s. This was happening in the 1800s. And I was fascinated by this. So he's going to come on because he wrote the article about this. And so it's just one of those things I think we as listeners might actually be really interested in this. But before I get Chris on, just a couple of things. Don't forget, go check out the Achigan brand. It is the smallmouth brand. It is smallmouth bass gear for you. It is the only brand. If you were a smallmouth nerd like me, you go buy the Achigan brand. They got loads of stuff. They're actually going to be at the well, by this time, this will have already aired, but they'll be at the Bassmaster Classic. I hope you guys have a blast down there. Don't forget also the Kayak Adventure Series. Its first event is coming down in Tallabassee, Florida. Now, I got to be honest with you. I will not be down in Florida, but I'm sure Drew Gregory and all the greatness that he brings will be off the hook for the very first one of the year. So if you haven't already registered or you haven't already made plans, if you're in the area and you might want to check it out, the Kayak Adventure Series is made out for anglers for all over. So yeah, definitely go check it out. It is a worthwhile thing to do. Also, take the time, stop by the Dubro Fishing website. Dubro has an awesome ton of stuff geared for saltwater and freshwater. And don't forget Yak Attack. Yak Attack is rigging the dream. And shout out to Wade Clements. I got to get you back on the podcast. We got to go down the river at some point again. A river runs through it. So so hopefully in a couple episodes, Wade Clements will be back on. But definitely check out definitely let me know if you are going to the Kayak Adventure Series down in Florida, because hey, I would love to hear about it. So definitely want to take a moment though to just appreciate the people that take the time to like message me about episodes, like all this positive feedback. This is no Joe Rogan podcast by any means. This is something I do completely for fun. I love talking to people. I just happen to be a smallmouth nerd, so like if you like to talk smallmouth, hey, hit me up, come on the show. But yeah, no, at the end of it, thanks. I really appreciate that. I love all the positivity and all the feedback and whatnot. So yeah, and like I said, River Run Podcast is on Spotify and it's on YouTube, so you know where to find it. And yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that. It is always uplifting. Okay, so I just want to welcome to the show Chris Gorsuch. Chris, how's it going, man?
It's going great, man.
Well, I want to say thank you very much for taking time to come on the River Run podcast. And like I was saying before, like, and we were talking about this backstage, like I was really taken by that article that you had written. It looks like it probably about almost 2 years ago now. But before we dive into like the River Run podcast, like history lesson, I guess you could say, let's talk about you. Like, I kind of came across this, and like you look like, just judging by the background, and you look like you spend a lot of time on the water. So yeah, like you've been guiding like on the Susquehanna River for like how long now?
I think this starts my 20th year.
Ooh.
I think this April starts year number 20. So 19 years.
So I'm gonna say this is probably like a passion, kind of started out like had a job somewhere else,
Yeah.
angler type of thing.
You know how it happens. You become a junkie pretty quick when
Yep,
you have success
100%.
with something, and smallmouth make that success fairly easy. So I never saw guiding in my future. That happened purely by accident. But was an engineer as my vocation. Loved taking notes. Loved keeping logbooks. Loved pushing myself, my gear, my equipment. And so smallmouth just felt like it was regular. And I don't mind lake fishing. I enjoy it. But in Pennsylvania, there's not a lot of really good lake fishing at all. So where most of our smallmouth fishing is done on, one of 3 or 4 rivers. And we have smallmouth now, from all the way east on the Jersey border to all the way west on the Pittsburgh, Ohio border. So you can find smallmouth bass probably within a 25 or 30-minute drive of wherever you live pretty easy. I mean, and they're all going to be stream or river run smallmouth. So it's a passion. And like I was saying, I think I've been writing for just over 30 years for magazines, and passion is a smallmouth, but you got to cover more stuff but than just smallmouth, even though that's my main gig. But you smallmouth fish, you run into pike and you become pike fisherman for a while, and you catch walleye and you become walleye fishing, especially when it gets so cold that the smallmouth don't eat as well as walleye do. And you get, sorry about that.
No worries. Oh, it's time for a good phone call.
Yeah.
It's the life of being a guide, like I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
somebody's
suppose.
calling you.
I usually turn that thing off. But in writing and doing seminars, I had a friend that I had 2 friends actually that were guiding on the river for smallmouth. Both were looking for someone to do some associate work for them, a guide a day with them, or double boat trip, 2 boat trips and things like that. And they pushed, and finally I relented and found out, wow, I really like this. I had no idea that I'd even like it, but I'm the kind of person who, when I guide, I don't like to fish. I'll show you how to do something if you ask a question, but I want all the fish to come from the clients during the day. I'd rather take care of the boat. And to me, that's fishing, because I'm fishing through them. I can say, oh, that was a strike. Did you see what your rod tip did? Or did you see how that worked? Did you see the fish chasing? That means we can start doing this. And I just love that aspect of it. So it just seemed like a natural fit between the photography work and the writing. And I fell into it. It wasn't something I had planned.
When you it's funny how like in life, the way things go, you we're all writing our own story, you know what I mean? And like there's loads of blank pages that still need to be written, but like
Right.
when you think of your story there, like it's kind of like a passion driven, you know, like it was one of those things that, you know, you saw it as, you know, you went out and you fished because you enjoyed to fish, not because you were looking to, you know, make money and whatnot. And later on in life, you turned your passion into a career and you become quite successful at the same time on the river. Now, like, just curious, on the Susquehanna is quite a large river.
Right.
What branches do you or like areas of the river do you guide on?
So I have a team of guys that work with me. We pretty much cover from Harrisburg east to the eastern side of the state. So, but for the Susquehanna, I fish the main area in Harrisburg from the Harrisburg area north, and then that's my springtime and fall time. Usually when we have during the cooler temperatures. When it gets hot, I chicken out and I run as far north as I can and still stay in Pennsylvania and be on the Susquehanna River. So in like mid-June through October, I tend to run up to the mountains and fish a smaller body of water called the North Branch of the Susquehanna. And I fish up there. It's a little cooler. You have a lot of mountain cover, so there's a lot more shade, a lot less, still a lot of railroad, a few highways, but it's not like, it's not like the concrete that we have around here that gathers the heat. And being a little bit higher in altitude and a little bit more into the mountains, it's just cooler. So I find I can do 2 trips a day without killing myself up there, where down here, the humidity is a bit worse. So.
And so like, and I'm sure we probably share the same in the humidity aspect, because I know in the summertime, like up here, it gets ridiculous. And there's days where, you know, by 10 o'clock in the morning, you're already ready to just say, you know what, I've had enough for today. You try to beat the sunrise, you know,
So
and I'm sure with guiding, you know, you at the same time, you're taking people out. So
that's a great thing. It's in like right today, we did 6 hours of, looking for bass, and tomorrow we'll do 6 to 7 hours looking for bass. And then next week we start our season. But when I go up there, my routine changes. Instead of doing, 6 or 8 hour trips where all hours are consecutive, I'll do these evening morning split trips. So to your mentioning, it's funny how you mentioned that, but to what you mentioned, it's just too hot after 11 o'clock in the morning to fish, and it doesn't get good to fish anymore until 5 or later.
Yeah.
And those are the best times to fish, but you have the 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., those 6 hours of just not the best hours to be on the water in the dog days of summer. So what we do is we have clients come up and we provide or give them access to either lodging for hotel stays or lodging camper rentals. Where we launch out of it's a private campground, and the gentleman who owns it, he rents campers out. So what we do is, if let's say you come in on a Thursday around 2-3 o'clock, get yourself settled in around 5 o'clock. We're going to go out and we're going to target fish between 5 and 5:30, as a start time, and then we'll go to dark so that you get the coolest part of the evening. You get the sunsets, you get the top water bite, you get that insect action that happens at only that time of the day, and you get to see nature from at a different piece. And then you come back, you burn a few burgers on the grill, maybe have an adult beverage or so, go to bed. The next morning at daybreak, we're back at it, and we're going to finish out the hours that we need. So if you're looking for a 6-hour trip, it might be 2 hours in the evening and 4 hours in the morning. If you're doing an 8-hour trip, it might be 3 and 5, so that you don't have to go past that 11 o'clock time frame. And a lot of people like it because, like I said, you've got the best 6 to 8 hours on the river that there is to fish.
Cool.
It's cooler. It's not hard on your body, and it doesn't feel like you're trying to kill time. As a matter of fact, because it's 2 short trips, it goes by so fast. It's like, I can't believe that was 4 hours.
Wow. And I gotta say, like on a guiding aspect, like that's actually like really well thought out. Like it would actually your plan to me
It's
sounds
different, right?
like it's for the client. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not just like, okay, get in the boat, let's go. Oh, it's too hot today. Sorry guys. Like it didn't pan out. Where this is like it's giving them
And
the
it hits people
experience.
on so many different levels. And let me explain. So let's say that you're a really experienced person, but you want to see different techniques at top water, or you want to see some different morning techniques, or what we're doing as the sun climbs, as you move off the bank and into deeper water, or better cover for those fish because they don't like the sunlight any more than we do. Or you could have someone who has wants to take their wife with them. They're really not sure that the wife wants to be on the water for 6 hours in a row.
Mhm.
So they could do, a 2 3s or a 3 and a 4 evening, morning. And then, just for kids, if you want to introduce kids to it, it's just such a great time. And that summertime generally does not necessarily mean the biggest fish, but boy, it means usually a lot of fish. So you're getting people who either want to find techniques to find the big fish when it's really tough, or you've got someone that says, I don't care how big fish we catch. I just need to catch a lot of fish because my 9-year-old or my 8-year-old needs, a fish every 10 or 15 minutes to keep him busy.
Yeah.
And so that's something that you can do relatively easy in the summertime, especially if you're fishing those core hours, that first light, last light, and you break it up. And they don't pay any different than it would be if they took all the hours together, but you don't have to suffer the heat of the day. So it's just one of those things. I think it was better for me. It was a way to, make my guide service a little different than everybody else's. And I probably do 90% of my trips are those split trips from mid-June to mid-October.
It's a well thought out plan, and at the same time it's really there for the client. If you no need to suffer through the heat and you're miserable, and why not break it up?
Fishing should be fun at all times, right? It should be fun. So
plus at the same time you probably build a bit more of a connection with these people, because if you're going to be there the night, you guys are probably all able
right. You're going to have some campfire moments, right?
Yeah.
I consider myself the guy who delivers coffee in the morning, right? Because that's usually what the first thing they forget, right? They have all their fishing gear, but I didn't bring any coffee. So I always have those travel mugs, those disposable travel cups and stuff like that. And I deliver the food and give advice of where to go to food if you don't want to cook at the campground, if you want to go out to eat. And sometimes I go out with them, but it just, like you said, they become your family, because I have people now that are in their 90s that have been going with me, since they were retired, or people whose grandchildren were 8 or younger, and now they're literally out of college and starting their own vocation. A couple in the field, right, in either the fishing field as a charter captain in the ocean, or someone who's doing WCO work, patrolling the waterways and stuff. So it's great to see. It's great to see the families. It's great to see the kids. Listen, I have nothing against video games, but I really like it when the kids are casting. And
I totally agree with you. It's my son, he loves video games, but he is a diehard fisherman. Like, we've gotten past the part of going out there and being like, Dad, we're not catching anything, to like, okay, I'm going to try this now. Okay, let's go over here. Let's do this. And it's like, I like fishing with this little angler. He's not so little anymore. He's, going to be 13 this year, but my daughter too, she loves coming out fishing. But it's one of those things. You're creating those life moments, those memories, and people just will never forget it. And also at the same time, people are going to remember, and you'll most likely be the first person that they suggest when somebody says, I would like to go out and do some river fishing. Maybe I should go out with a guide. And it's like, well, I know somebody. His name's Chris, and Chris has got a cool plan, so it's one of those things, you definitely change. And you, like you were talking about, too, like veterans and whatnot too, that you're taking out, like that's, like it's all good stuff, and I think it's not just a guide service, you're doing a lot more than just putting fish in the boat, everlasting memories and good times.
I have 5 guys that work for me, with me, however you want to word it. And the first thing I said is, listen, we got to keep fishing. It's got to be fun. It's there. People are here, and you have no idea what's going on in someone else's life. you have no idea what's going on, but you can kind of control what's going on in the boat. So,
Yeah.
like I'll see parents, because parents want their children to always be in their best behavior. And I understand that, but kids are kids.
Yeah.
So if they want to go through my tackle box, or play with soft plastics, they want to look at different things to throw or make suggestions on what to throw. Sometimes just giving in and allowing them to have success on the lure that they picked can be more important than the trophy bass that they caught. Right.
Exactly.
I mean, I have one young woman. She really, really, really wanted to fish this god awful disco pukey looking grub type, twin grub tail thing that her father got. It had pinks and yellows and fairy colors in it. Little. She called it her little fairy lure. So she wanted to throw it, and the father's going, we'll throw that at the lake back home. I said, we'll put it on. I said, it probably won't work, but we'll put it on. Why not try it? And sure enough, she throws it in, and 10 minutes later catches a fish. And I think to this day, when she sees me, she says, remember you told me I wouldn't catch a fish on that really pinky curly lure, and I did catch it. So it's just funny the way that you make memories sometimes. But
exactly, sorry, go ahead.
I always tell parents, let the day unfold. They'll be fine. If they need to get out in the water and splash their feet in cold water for a few minutes, or flip over a few rocks and find some either hellgrammites or crayfish, let's do that for 10 minutes to give them just a break, and like I said, those shorter trips that you break up, it's almost like a mini vacation for the parents, and it works out really well.
I was just going to say, behind you, your wall of smallmouth, it looks like you have a couple muskie up there, a walleye.
There's a couple walleye. I have pretty much. I want to have everything that we catch in the river. I don't have any catfish up right now. I do have them, but I don't have them up.
Wow.
And these are mostly, I would say 90% of these are pieces that I got either from auctions, or they're pieces that I had done from replicas. Like the muskie over here is just one that a client of mine caught, and he ended up getting the replica made. And then when he didn't want it anymore, he said, hey, I'd love to have this if you have it in your collection. So we have it here. So it's just
very cool.
Yeah. So we have rock bass, and I have panfish, and I have perch. I just don't have them up. The show season just ended, so I use these ones off for our shows. And
no, that's very cool. I think that's like an awesome backdrop, and I would love to have a taxidermied smallmouth on the wall. I've seen some pretty cool ones. It's pretty artistic people out there in the way that they can do their replicas and whatnot. But yeah, no, I gotta say though, as you get into guiding, and do you still go out? Like, I always wondered this about guides. Do you still go out and fish?
Yeah.
Or do you kind of say, actually, because I hear some people saying, they're like, oh, if I go out fishing, like I'm not making money,
There's a lot of different, I won't say philosophies or viewpoints on it. So I was an engineer for nearly 30 years. It got to a point where they were offering a great retirement package, and I had an opportunity to go do something else, and I took it. And then when that other thing didn't work out, I kind of came back and kind of needed to recenter. So I couldn't go back into engineering right away because of, you sign these things saying I'm not going to go back and directly compete with you if you're going to pay me to take an early retirement. Yeah. So I had some time to kill. So I just decided, well, I'm going to take this part-time guiding that I've been doing for a couple of years, and I'm just going to make a go out of it until let's see if I can make a go out of it. And people, throughout the years, like you said, there's hundreds of clients and hundreds of days a year that you're on the water, and people say to me, are you bored of it yet? Are you bored of it yet? And I think because I don't fish while I'm guiding, right, it kind of separates the fishing aspect, which I enjoy doing that, the breaking it down and the angling and helping people with rod control, or, what did I do wrong in that? Well, you might not have done anything wrong, right? Just sometimes fish come off. But the idea of rod position, setting position, different types of lures, different types of rods, different types of lines and why we use the rigs we're using. And there's just so much to talk about, and so much that they might have questions on boats or kayaks or paddles or trolling motors or electronics. And it's just, there's enough going on that I don't have to take that fishing line in there and catch a fish for myself to enjoy my time in the water. Seeing somebody else catch it is actually truly rewarding. And I don't burn myself out, because the moment that I find that I don't like fishing or I don't enjoy fishing like I used to, I'm probably going to back off from 5 days a week and start doing 3 or 2, because I don't want to lose this passion. But so far, in nearly 20 years, the passion holds. And, as I get older, into my 60s now, you get, I don't think I could cast, 5 or 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. I don't think I could do that. Just body breaks down a bit. Right. So
Yeah.
It's nice to be on the water. I really enjoy it. I spent a wonderful career indoors. And so that means I don't mind the rain. I don't mind the cold. I don't mind the wind as much as most. It's just being outdoors. I don't oversleep generally, right? I can't think of any time I've ever missed a trip because I overslept. I'm as excited about tomorrow's trip as I am about next Wednesday's trip.
Awesome.
It's fun. And I do get
love that
breaks
drive.
a year and get the wintertime is my time to fish. And I do take a week or 2 off in the spring and the fall, just to do some things for myself, just to keep that passion alive, to learn. And of course, there's always, the long days in the summer, and not every day is booked sometimes. So I can get out on rainy days or high water days when it's not best suited for clients and still feed that passion.
When we were talking backstage, right now you run jet boats, but you had mentioned that at one point you were also running wilderness system kayaks, which is super cool.
Yes, it was I'll say back in the early 2000s, the kayak fishing world was relatively small. I mean, most of the players that you have, most of the people that you have on your staff, whether it's kayak bass fishing or if it's yak attack, there's several of them. But I knew these guys that run these companies before they were running these companies. Many of them I left when they're either in their first few months of their company or at their first trade show. And so I've been able to see the kayak world explode. But before it exploded, and right around the birth of Yak Attack, or just before Yak Attack, rigging your own fishing kayak from a kayak that really wasn't intended to go fishing was a little fad there for a while. So
Awesome.
We would rig up a bunch of kayaks. We would help give some ideas to some of these manufacturers and help some of these companies, like Wilderness, like Jackson, that help them evolve their kayak, their fishing kayak in that world. But I don't think anybody who was selling a $300 or $400 kayak at the time, even the more expensive ones, the paddle ones that were out there, I don't think anybody ever foreseen what the kayaks would look like in 20 years, right? So when I was doing it, it was really easy. I had an enclosed trailer. I could hold 6 kayaks in it, and I would recommend that people want to say, well, I want to try a sit-in or a sit-on. I want to try this brand or that brand. I had a lot of different ones. Most of mine were Wilderness, but I had access to other kayaks. So you could take a small group of people out on the river in almost any conditions, right? Usually super shallow conditions that aren't really great for a 3,000-pound boat. But it just it was a great fit for a time when the industry was just really just growing. And right now, I mean, you don't have to rig your own kayak if you don't want to. They have such, a lot of these kayaks have been masterfully designed for your gear. You don't have to come up with stuff that we did back in 2001, 2002. I think one of my first articles on kayak fishing was 99. And of course it had been done before, people have been doing it, but it was not the industry that it is today. Right. So it was great. I probably did it for 5 or 6 years. And, as as the jet boating trips got more popular and people started to buy their own kayaks, it got less popular, I think. Not kayak fishing, but the classes or the
Yeah.
guiding stuff that from the kayak, it got.
And probably too, like, on if you were to book a trip, for somebody like me going, well, like, yeah, I could do kayak fishing, but I've never had the opportunity to go on a jet boat.
Right.
Hey, let's check out the jet boat, like, I really want to see. And
It got more popular.
Yeah.
You didn't have to worry about paddling. You didn't get separated from your friends, because if you get 4 or 5 people out and one person in the middle trying to guide everybody, or spend an hour with each person, showing them different techniques and racing back and forth, eventually people get spread out. So you're not really with the people. But when you're on the boat, you're literally 10 feet from them all day long, and you don't have to really do anything more than fish, which I think a lot of people enjoy.
Now, I think I kind of want to get onto this article that you wrote, because I have questions, but the origin of a smallmouth story is it's pretty interesting, because when you look at smallmouth in general, like, there's a lot of places that see them as more of an invasive species. They're not actually native to that system.
Not to a lot of them.
And when you think of that, you go, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, that totally, like, of course that, no, they're not. And in this article, this idea that they began to move smallmouth throughout, but they're using the railway and whatnot, and putting them into these systems now today, such as, from, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania. Had that not happened, might not have the same everlasting angler effects that we do have today with those rivers. And a lot of those areas hold some ginormous smallmouth. But yeah, like, how did, like, I'm just curious, like, how did this all come about for you? Like, just to go, and this is like a really interesting article, because, when you think of articles regarding fishing, you think of lures, tackle, techniques, gear, but actually the history side of it, and, the father of fly fishing, who really continued it all the way through the 1800s, I think it was.
Yep.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
So yeah, it's and what's really interesting, and I think you brought it up too when we were backstage, is that there's a story for the Delaware and the Susquehanna, how they're kind of linked, and the Potomac River, and how the Potomac River and the Susquehanna are kind of linked through this smallmouth world. And then you were telling me about the origins for it in Canada, right? So I think there's quite a few places, but I think people didn't realize now, because they're everywhere and so easy accessible, that it was when they did the canal systems, and that intentionally and unintentionally brought smallmouth into other flows with these canals, because anything the canal touched, then these things could get there. So the Great Lakes and the Ohio River were originally the main bodies of water where these fish were, and the French settlers, as one of your backers there, Ashigan.
Yes.
Sounds very similar to the Oshigan
yeah.
word that's in the Algonquin language, and it's a Algonquin French word. And when the settlers were asking about these fish that were in the Ohio Basin and the Great Lakes area, I think it was the Algonquin Indians used the term Ashigan or Oshigan.
Oshigan, yeah.
And so they have it literally penned in some of those historical books that this particular black bass is what the Indians called the Ashigan. And that's not what they were calling the fish. They were calling its tenacity, its fierce. So I think
fierce one.
It translates as fierce one. So I've seen it spelled a couple different ways. I don't really know how they pronounce it, but I could just see settlers or trappers, coming and the excitement that they had seeing them, and then the Native Americans that are telling them, hey, this is what we call these things, or this is a word that they wrote down in their book for this particular fish. To me, in my mind, I see it as one of the first smallie junkies that were out there. And then as you go through the history, and you with the rail lines coming into play, where they either took over the work that a lot of these canals were doing, or they worked in conjunction with them. A lot of the travel was now a big thing, not just travel for industry, but travel to get from point A to point B was now much, much easier. And a lot of these railroad workers were people who also found out that they really enjoy fishing for this, and wouldn't this be great if I had these things on our home waters? So there's a number of those stories too, where railroad workers were also involved with bringing smallmouth, from the border waters of Canada and New York, all the way down into some of these lower 48
So
that didn't really have them.
The St. Lawrence River was considered one of the native homes for smallmouth.
I would have to look into that. It probably won't be very hard to find, but it certainly opened it up to smallmouth because of its flowing, right? So having the St. Lawrence flowing out of there has to mean it was always native, right? It has to. I mean, it's not man-made. So coming out of Lake Ontario, it would have to be natural run smallmouth.
So when you go back and you think of these French settlers, and they've come in, and these Algonquin indigenous native people are like, the fierce one, and you go back and you think of the tackle that they had, or you think of just the idea that they had spent all this time traveling and probably had never seen a smallmouth, because in being in Europe and whatnot, now to come into this completely wilderness system and you have smallmouth, and you begin to have railway workers, because I believe they even took one of the smallmouth. There was I think it was a German scientist who had taken one of the smallmouth and had actually sent it back to Europe, and they had I guess they dissect this thing, meaning that it was different from a largemouth bass. It didn't have the same characteristics of the jawline and the mouth and the fins, and I always kind of, when I go back and I think about you think of what we have today, we get excited about a smallmouth jumping, blowing up in the water, and you said it that first smallmouth junkies. Well, I think about how quickly I got hooked, and I was just thinking how quickly these guys got hooked at the end of the day, and
can you imagine having some kind of non-stretch line, with either a metallic hook or a bone hook from an Indian, and hooking something in a small creek, and can you imagine that first tug on your fingers when that thing took off, right? So it further, well, we know you've always heard pound per pound, nothing fights like a smallmouth in the freshwater world, but there is a lot of truth to it. I mean, it's there. And then if you go, into the late 1700s, into the early 1820s, and then you understand about how, for us from the Susquehanna, we got smallmouth from two different places that they weren't native at. So you have Thaddeus Norton who put them in the Delaware, and within a matter of 5 to 7 years, that fishery just takes off, and smallmouth are going all over the place. And a lot of these eastern fisheries used to have either striped bass or salmon running up there, but as pollution or dams went up and other man-made structures
overfishing, probably
it stopped the salmon from running. It stopped a lot of the ocean run fish from running. So they didn't have a lot to fish for. So when Thaddeus brought it back and it took over, and you could actually go, within a few years, go to the shoreline where he let these fish go and catch dozens of fish. The Fish Commission, who awarded him the right to do it in the first place, commissioned him to actually do it again for the Susquehanna. And so fish came from the Delaware, originally from the natural, came from the Delaware. Then the fish were actually caught out of the Delaware and transferred to the Susquehanna. And a very similar situation happened with Potomac. Around the same time that Thaddeus was doing it there in the Delaware, they had a very successful stocking program that was grassroots on the Potomac, and it took over really, really well. And then they took around the same time frame that they were doing with the Delaware smallmouth, they took these ones out of Potomac and put it into the Susquehanna as well. So it kind of got a double dose of seeding, if you will. But
so
it's all literally, as they say, it's all history since then, and it is probably one of the dominant features that you can fish for here. We have a great catfish population, the channel cats, and maybe 20 years ago, some purposely, accidentally, unknowingly leashed upon us the flatheads, which we thought would be very devastating to the smallmouth. I was one of them. And it did change their habitat. It did change the way that they winterize. They winter themselves, or where they winter their holes. But it didn't change the adaptation of the smallmouth to coexist and just take on some shallower water where these fish don't necessarily always go. So it has changed the way that I fish for them, but it hasn't destroyed the fishery by any margin. Not like I thought it would.
Now, I just want to go back here. Thaddeus Norris is what would be known as the father of American fly fishing.
Yes, that's what he was well known for. Right. Exactly.
He was he would have been, so we're talking like the 1800s here right now.
Yeah.
So like, let's go back in time here. As he was actually not only just known for fly fishing, but he also took in the idea of conservation.
Correct.
And the idea that, we should actually really, if you go back to what it is now, a lot of people would say, oh, catch and release is a really important thing. We need to make sure we let the fish go. It is important.
He did it at a time when no one even thought that was the craziest thing in the world. Why would you fish and not keep your fish? I mean, we still have that mentality today, right? But can you imagine what percentage of anglers he was at the time that say, no, I just enjoy catching them? Can you imagine the people that said, why would you go fishing and throw the fish back? Right. It's easy for us right now because we've seen, through decades now of fish management, how important it is to harvest at times and to catch and release. Right. We've seen how certain bodies of water need both. And a lot of these systems are really done well, but for Thaddeus, it had to be something that was outside the realm, because he didn't stock these fish, to eat them. He stocked these fish to catch them because they're so much fun. And if you look at his writings and some of the stuff that he even basically says, you get, and there's a lot of historians here that did it, that fished for smallmouth and had some great sayings about, never stepping into the same river twice, or, pound for pound, or just the fact that you let them go today and someone gets to catch them tomorrow. It's somebody else's fish tomorrow. So it's just a really weird, must have been a really weird concept, in the mid 1800s, and by the time this was successful in the 1870s.
Because when you think of this, Mr. Norris here, he was actually born in Virginia, and then from Virginia in his teens, he moves up to Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, his passion, I guess it sounds like it must start and in his youth and whatnot. And it begins for like an entire life part here. And he's begun, to really preach the value too of, light tackle. And, that being said, in a time when are you really talking about tackle? Like, are you like,
I mean,
there's no advertisements for
you'd
rod
have to
and reel?
realize it was, if it wasn't fly fishing, it was going to be some kind of a spin fishing. In 1800s, I'm not even sure, it was, what the line would be. Would it be Dacron still, or something along those lines? Would it be one of those conventional little tiny conventional reels that came over from Europe? I mean, yeah, they definitely had a different hurdles than we have today.
Yeah, because like when you think of today, like you could go to the gas station and you could pick up a lure. You like back then. I'm assuming you like like
Listen,
uh,
it's changed in the last 50 years, let alone when you look at it,
yeah.
for it to be
You could literally get on your
200
phone
plus
right
years.
now and go on Amazon and you could have it delivered to your house tomorrow. Where, in the 1800s, if you weren't, I don't know, if you're fly fishing, I assume you're probably using very much so natural things that you actually have to go out and work for. Or if you're fishing with something in a live minnow sense or whatnot, you'd had to catch it first. It's interesting that somebody begins to preach the idea of lighter tackle. Like it's in a time when you're fishing to eat, you're not fishing to catch and release. And God for
Exactly.
knows, you probably had to sketch a photo at that time if you were, if you,
Yeah,
you
there
know,
was no cell phone, that's for sure. Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting, how the sports we enjoy today, the catching we enjoy so much today, is really comes down to a few people were so bitten by this bug that they had to have these in their backyard. I mean, I can remember fishing a lake in New York, um, Oneida Lake,
Oneida, yeah.
45 years ago, and um, really not knowing much other than I wanted to catch fish, and I knew that they had a lot of bass in that. And I remember coming into the shore, on a rowboat, and the guys in these, walleye boats were coming in and saying, "How'd you guys make out?" And we got like 30. And they go, "We got 30 walleye today." I go, "No, we got 30 smallmouth." And they looked at us and went, "Why were you fishing for smallmouth? Like, they don't taste good. Why would you fish for those?" So I understand, just from even in the evolution over the last 5 decades, how much of the sport has changed, how much the smallmouth has changed from being a they literally went from a trash fish, to a fish that is targeted by professional anglers, right? It's a
Yeah.
trophy fish. It's a
Bassmaster Classic, you
game
know what I mean?
species, right? It went
Yeah.
from literally being a trash fish, to being purposely stocked in a lot of these places, and and thriving. I mean, I would say that the smallmouth population on most places that they were introduced is just thriving. I know that there are smallmouth fisheries in Maine now that they're just it was a super cold water fishery. They introduced them. They took off. They did really good. And because our climate has, it goes through cycles and is changing, it's a little warmer up there than it had been. And the largemouth are taking over. And they're actually doing just the opposite of some of the southern states, where they're now looking at this largemouth as being the invasive fish in the water that they don't want. They want to keep it a smallmouth fishery, and they don't want the habitat being taken over by these largemouths. So, there's a couple of these on the St. Croix flowage where they're literally telling people, you cannot release these. If you catch a largemouth, you cannot release them.
Take them
So,
home for
I don't know
dinner.
if it's still going on, but to me, that's the furthest thing in the world, because most people were so largemouth centric that small. Like I said, smallmouth felt like it was a grassroots effort.
Well, and another interesting part too is that Thaddeus had actually taken to fish management practices. Like he went beyond rod design. He was, even though he preached about catch and release, but to take it to, the commission, I think it would have been, and to say like, hey, like we need to do something here. Like we need to stock, and to go from Pennsylvania over and bring in these fish and somehow raises funds with local fishermen to bring more fish in, probably knowing in his head that these fish are probably going to be released and they'll be caught for most likely food.
Right. It wasn't like they stocked thousands, and it wasn't like it was a short trip to get them here. So, bringing them here on a railroad car in those old-fashioned milk jugs, and literally ladling, ice on top of them to keep the water at a certain temperature. It's not like it just the complexities of making this work.
Not like a live well.
Not a live well, right? It's their ability to do that, and then for the state to adopt a lot of the practices that they did there. For a while, Pennsylvania had a railroad stocking car, and they actually had people on there that would actually ladle the ice onto these things. Just crazy, just that was actually a job, that was actually something that happened. And it like I said, we have a lot locally have a lot to thank Thaddeus for, because was one of many, maybe a dozen or more people in that mid 1800s, early 1900s that wanted to spread smallmouth into these things. And I think honestly, most of them that I've read were all done in conjunction or permission with whatever conservation department was operating within the state or the country. So they actually did this. It wasn't by guys at night doing it, right? Yeah, a few of them did it amongst themselves, but a lot of it was done with permission. And it's, like I said, it's one of the great stories in our rivers today, because what would be left if they weren't there?
Exactly. And when you look at the Susquehanna Basin, the Delaware River, and you think back to the rail, and we were talking about this backstage, it wasn't until I had read this article and I'm going, there's a river I fish and there's a rail that goes right across it, and I'm like, yeah. I wonder if this would have been. And it's also when I was reading about, for instance, how smallmouth bass came through Ontario, and especially going northern Ontario and whatnot, they had obviously used the same tactics that Thaddeus did, using these gigantic, I guess the 15-gallon milk containers that they had stocked these fish in, and then throughout the rail, they would be put into whatever stream, river system it was, or lake. But it was one of those things that you made me think, when I look at Google Maps and whatnot, because as a complete river nerd, I'm always looking at new spots to hit and whatnot. But it's now I look even more, I'm like, oh, there's an actual railroad bridge this way here, and I never would have taken any idea to that. And then all of a sudden now it's like, I want to go back in time. What would this been like, in the 1800s? Would have that been a sight to see? All of a sudden this train just stops, people get out, and okay, this is the fishery, this is the river, this is the stream, this is where they're going. Because at the time, there was let's say in a 15-gallon milk container, it said there was somewhere between 450 to 700 bass of variety of size were placed in large 15-gallon drums. So that's bass from
very small ones to all different sizes,
all sizes.
And then when they stocked them after catching them out of the Delaware years and years later to move them to the Susquehanna, they were much larger fish and there was fewer of them, but they did it in the same way. And we're not, like I said, very, very risky and manual labor, right, to get these things into these containers, keeping the water cold, keeping enough ice, putting them in a train car, shipping them, moving them from that train car and putting them on a horse and buggy, right, to get them down to wherever they were doing, going to stock these things into the rivers or different places in the rivers. It took a lot for those. It took a lot of risk on that first, a couple $100 a day it cost them to do this.
Well, and if you go back to how much he had purchased these smallmouth for, he was purchasing them at 25 cents US a piece in a time where, you know, in the 1800s, I don't know how much, you know, money would be going through, but
You'd
you
think there
know,
would be people jumping on that one to figure out, you know.
yeah, and you know, let's say he had spent, you know, well over $1,100, you know, on these smallmouth, you know, that he had raised through locals. Like, it sounds like it's donation through the community of sportsmen here who enjoyed fishing for it. Like, it's it's quite an interesting
It is
go at.
like you said, $1,000 then was a significant amount of money and a tremendous amount of risk, because you could get here. We've all tried to keep fish alive, right?
Yeah,
You could get here and you know, it a day plus journey, and they survived. Not only survived, but they thrived. And they naturally, just like, you know, from your kayak fishing, right? You find the water rises, and you find an outlet where there's clean water coming out of it. You can get the nose of your kayak in there. You know, if you can cast in there, you're going to catch something. So
oh, for sure.
they move into almost every little piece of river that they possibly can. And you know, there's seasonal ones, and there's also ones at home there. They actually call those bodies of water their homes. So it's interesting how they survive.
Yeah, and
One of the
like
biggest problems I have with these stories is people say, you know, why did you complain so much when you have like flathead catfish coming into the river, or when the snakeheads are coming in? And I try to explain, so there's a difference between, you know, not being native and being invasive, right? Or being introduced versus, you know, being introduced through, you know, fisheries biology, at least someone taking a look at it.
an actual study.
A couple of guys going, hey, we're gonna dump these things in here because they taste great. And you know, a lot of that stuff that happens by accident seems to thrive. I mean, look at the goby, right? The round goby that came in on the bilges of these ships, and got into the canal systems, it got into the Great Lakes, and it got into
zebra
everything.
mussels.
Yeah, zebra mussels, and there's always the big fear, and it does change things. But you know, it's funny how it happens almost with or without. I mean,
Now,
once it's here, it's there.
Would you think, though, if you think of fishing pressure, okay, let's just back then, when people were, and I'm sure people still today, you know, it is legal to take a smallmouth home and eat it for supper. Like, there's, unless otherwise, like, obviously check your local listings. I'm not saying that it's all legal, but back then, you could just, you know, could you throw, you know, 5? Could you take home 10? Could you take home 20? You know, because this is your livelihood. Like, you need to eat. You know, where today,
right?
You know, we have limits. You know,
you can track this history. I'm trying to think. I know that the creel limits for like trout and for bass are quite different than they are today, right? I mean, I think there was actually a time, you know, probably right around when the Fish Commission was actually formed. It was actually called something else before that, but when it was actually formed into the Fish Commission, it goes back into the 1800s when that's how far back they date. But I think throughout the years, they have made some small changes to where it was like 8 at 10 inches to 6 at 12 inches or 4 at 15 inches or whatever the rules that got changed, where the populations had gotten to the point where, you know, they could kind of say, okay, well, this is working, but I think 10-inch fishers, you know, we probably should make it 6, 12-inch fishes for whatever reason they were doing it. But I've seen them make changes on bodies of water, even here on the Susquehanna, where if the population seems to be suffering because of disease or because of low young of year, you know, multiple years in a row where the spawn class just got destroyed by floods, they made some pretty drastic rules. And one of the rules we're still under right now, and they've tweaked it a little bit, but is where I fish on the lower part of the river, you know, pretty much from Sealings Grove all the way down to the Maryland border, you cannot harvest a smallmouth at any time of the year here. It's all catch and release. And other bodies of water that are smallmouth are most of the same regulations as the rest of the state. But for us, there is no harvesting currently.
And once again, could you pay tribute right now to the father of American fly fishing, Mr. Thaddeus, who started this whole didn't start it. Maybe there was others that were part of this, but if you think of conservation as a whole, that's conservation right there. That people are saying, you know what, let's take a break. Let's give these fish a chance.
Just over a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, we had ice on our river floating down the river, and so much ice on the shorelines you couldn't launch a boat. Today, I saw 2 completely full parking lots, not a trailer spot left on a Monday and a Tuesday. Wow. For people fishing for smallmouth, not fishing for walleye, not fishing for muskies. They were fishing for smallmouth. So there's pressure. When you have people taking days off in the middle of the week in March to go bass fishing, it's a statement. It's a statement to your fishery. It's a statement to how much passion these people have for their investment. Forget about being, fighting cabin fever because of a cold winter. But I don't think I would have seen this even 30 years ago, right? I just don't think I would have seen anywhere near this much enthusiasm about the sport. I think it's just going to continue to grow.
And it only should, and that's why at the same time for us, like, I think, like, for me, like, I solely believe in the duty to take care of our fisheries, keep them around, because I want my kids and I want their kids, and I want people to still be able to go out and fish and still have that same excitement that I had and I have, for smallmouth fishing. And, when you think back to when you maybe first got into fishing, and you look at what it is now as a whole, like how much, let's say it's a solid passion, but you also see the world around us, and you see more and more of the, let's say we'll talk about pollution, disease, and all that going into these systems, and you see more people getting into it. It's that part where you can say, as an angler, it is amazing to see all of this, but at the same time, I hope that still, as humans as we are, we still cherish and want to take the time for conservation, because without that, like, we could just go and fish it till it's nothing, and then once that's gone, it's gone, and unless somebody's gonna want to redo what Thaddeus has done, I'd hate to see those. So something like, where we were just talking about, it's only catch and release, like that is, that's just so awesome to hear that, there are, fisheries, and I'm sure there's fisheries all over that are doing this, taking that in and making
I think they do creel. I think most places do creel studies. I think they want to protect it, for a number of reasons, right? They want to make sure that the resource is there. I like the attitude with the, some of these, anglers promoting, resource first, enjoying the catch and release part. Also understanding that there are times when harvest is probably a smarter move, right? If you've got stunned fish, or you need to harvest a portion of those fish to make, to allow them to grow, or to improve the fishery. There's times for both. It's not always, it's not always on one side. So I just like that there are. I mean, it seems like, New York really seems to have one of the better programs for fisheries management. I know that, Canada's pretty serious. Their WCOs are pretty serious about their fisheries.
Yes, we are very serious.
I'd like to, as nice as the story comes for Pennsylvania, I wish that Pennsylvania understood a little more about the smallmouth bass, because it's still one of those, I'll call it stepchildren, we're so trout centric here that, I think trout and walleye get the big billing as far as the fish commission when it comes to stocking it's one of the number. Those are the two number stocking programs, right? And the people say we don't have to stock smallmouth because they're so prolific and they can survive and
they're
and they
apex
do
predator.
and they do. But it's just one of those things where the way that Pennsylvania stepped in, 2012 and had smallmouth symposiums, and we're taking a look at some of the problems in the river and some of the pollution areas, and then looking at it from the mollusks and a lot of the shellfish, and looking at true pollution and what might be causing some of these problems, and then looking at the Mother Nature and what she brought on us for early spring storms, and just doing the great work that they did, and still coming to an agreement that said, listen, we're going to protect this resource, and we're going to make it, set a moratorium that says no harvesting of these fish until the fishery gets to a point where we feel it can come back. And I've reaped the benefits, and I think people who, the size of the fish that you're catching in your home waters, but our it's probably only been, like I said, since the early 2000s, late 1990s, where finding a 3 and 4 pound fish in this river was probably not something you saw a lot of. You would always find that one fish that somehow got it through, and he was he won the tournament at 4.5 pounds. But people are regularly catching in tournaments 4.5, 5 pound fish. There's been some 6. There's been a 7. There's some really, really big fish out there that you just didn't see before. And that's just, it has to go back to fisheries management, protecting these fish, and people understanding that you put that fish back, it gets bigger.
Yeah, let it grow. Let it go so it can grow. Like I firmly believe that it is one of those things that I feel it is important, for any fishery. But at the same time, you make a very valid point that it comes a time where harvest is, I think of like a cattle farm, like a bull, you know what I mean? Like eventually that one bull, it's time to go, like it's time for a new bull to come in and do his thing. And you think of, if you look back at like pictures, back in the day, and people have these like big stringers of smallmouth, and they're like, some of them just look like massive, like they're huge fish, and they're being taken home to eat. And if you think of even back in the day, in the 1800s, Thaddeus, when where he was getting these smallmouth from, and how big were, even if you go even further, if those French settlers were, were they just getting these, let's say 12, 13-inch fish, or were these like 20-inch fish that were just blowing up all over the place? Like, it's interesting to think about those things. And now, like you were just saying, like it's not uncommon at all to come across a 5 pound fish, where, earlier, you were lucky to get like a 3 or 4,
right,
on the river.
I've seen it happen at a number of fisheries, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, where they're just, I don't think the St. Lawrence, at least not when I was a kid, the St. Lawrence was not known for, the best smallmouth water, in the Northeast. I just don't think it was. It was prolific, and it had a lot of smallmouth, but I don't think anybody 30 or 40 years ago would have anticipated that those weigh-in results that we had a couple of years ago on that river, right? That's
they keep getting bigger every year, and
right.
The fish get even bigger. Like, right, some massive smallmouth have been caught. I think it was like 2024. I think there was a gentleman who caught he was on the U.S. side, near was it Waddington, or it was Watertown maybe. Anyways, and he had caught a gigundo small. Didn't think it was, hooked it, day tournament type of thing. Next thing you know, you just set a record. And in the end, he just put it back. He was like, I'm not going to hold on to this fish because, the state wants to come and, weigh it, and the good chance fish is going to probably die. Yep. So I'm just going to put this thing back. Because a fish that big, Jesus, how old is that fish? You know what I mean? And like,
Was it 15 years old? Was it older than that? And some of these things are growing. The food, some are crediting like the goby as being one of the reasons why these fish are, why your fish there on the St. Lawrence Seaway are getting so big, or the Great Lakes. I don't know. It's got to be something. It's got to be a combination of the environment that they're in, what they're eating, and again, just being protective. I mean, Canada protects the fish a little bit differently than New York does. I think I'm sure year to year one side's better than the other, but they're working to certainly make that fishery the world-class fishery that it is.
yeah, and like but at the same time, when it becomes a world-class fishery, it begins to draw a lot of attention, and that attention brings in some pretty big tournaments and tournament circuits. Like you'll have like the FLW come up to Messina, New York. Years past, you've had the Bassmaster come to Waddington, Clayton, New York. Yeah, no, it definitely draws. You got a lot of big bass tournaments on the Canadian side. The back in the day was Renegade. You have Fuel. Oh God. Like there's so many that come through, and it draws a lot of attention. But it's at the same time, it's one of those. There's the St. Lawrence is one of those fisheries that will leave you pulling your hair out. Like it's
Right.
just like you have to really have to understand it. But and with the advancements,
I think there's
in
quite a bit of those
electronics.
fisheries, right?
Oh, I'm sure
As
there's.
soon as you think you got something figured out, that's when the bottom falls out on you. But yeah, that's fishing, and I think that's what makes it so frustrating and fun at the same time.
But I think just chasing smallmouth in general, it's just such a fun challenge. You know what I mean? Like, and for a fish that can go many miles, throughout a river system, like that to me is just what makes it interesting to catch them. But at the same time, when I think back to like when Thaddeus had gotten this, caught and catching smallmouth and moving smallmouth and whatnot, like really, like when you think to the size of fish that he was catching, or even just what was it like then? You know what I mean? Were they migrating as far?
It couldn't have been. It could not have been. I think I think that one of the magazine articles I had read, it said 2 to 3 pounds, right? That was
amazing.
Some of the fish up to 2 to 3 pounds. And they had hoped that they would get bigger. To me, the most impressive part of it was that you could stock something on the shores of eastern Pennsylvania, on the Delaware River, and come back 3 or 4 years in that same exact location and catch, 5 fish per hour, 10 fish per hour. Just think of how prolific, that they must have just been thriving, or the food base there, because there was no predators, the food base, whatever it was that just kicked these fish off. And then to take those same fish that they had, that they either had grew up from those canisters, or were born from an egg and were harvested 7 years later and brought, to the center of the state and stocked the Susquehanna. The story is just impressive. It's just so much could have gone wrong that first event. Just,
well, and
not being able to keep the fish alive, just there's so much that could have gone wrong.
And you look at today's advancements in technology, like you're somebody who's obviously used a live well on a boat, but this isn't a lot. This is a
this isn't
jug
with
this isn't ice,
filtering the water.
Exactly.
They were getting
on a
aeration.
railway.
They were getting aeration through those ladles and the ice, and it was a completely different way. Obviously, it worked, but just think that you probably couldn't have left these containers unattended for very long, and have these fish survive. I mean, they're not trout. Trout would be almost, I can't imagine trying to keep trout alive without without aeration. But as well as I do, that's a lot of small fish in a 13-gallon container, with just ice and a ladle, and keeping the water aerated, keeping the water cold to the temperature that needed. I mean, right now it's so much easy for us to look up and say, what's the optimum temperature for a smallmouth? When do smallmouth start to, be disease prone or when's it too warm for smallmouth? We could look that stuff up and find it. But back then, I think that there was a lot of trial and error, right? I don't think that they had, hey Siri.
Exactly. Like, hey Alexa, I'm just curious.
Right, exactly.
And there was none, like, because really at the end of the day, like, the idea was to get these fish into these other fisheries. So your job was to, either make sure the ice is going, and then I'm sure everybody had a job to what they needed to do. Not to mention, you then had to get the fish to the actual river or the stream, wherever it was going to be put, which was a whole nother. And then you think of bass tournaments where they have live wells full of these fish, and they get to these weigh-ins, and now these fish are bellied up because
there's mortality, right? There can be mortality even with all the technology, even with everything you have. Just the temperature changes, right? There's and even when things are perfect, there's a level of mortality. The fact that I'm going to say this, they raised all this money, and that the way that they did it, they went out there and got the fish, brought them back, put them in the river. I'm sure they had a lot of intelligence at the time and knowing exactly, knowing what to do. But I can't imagine that they had the wealth of knowledge we have now for these species, and it succeeded. So It's one of those things where the stocking programs, they really, I mean, and I don't think that the bass have been stocked since. Like, I don't think that there's been stocking programs on these rivers for smallmouth since.
They've just done so well.
Population we have today, it's ebbs and flows, it's the ups and downs. I think it's survived itself. I don't believe that it's not like walleye where every few years they revamp the stocking program, or they have, hatcheries that help, on lean years, help put brand new fingerlings into the river. To my knowledge, the smallmouth bass that were there, they have not brought in any more smallmouth bass. It's what they are.
You could just wonder what the gene pool is like for those smallmouth, like how far they have come. Because even when you talk about the Delaware River, being that at one time, Thaddeus Norris had netted over 2,000 from the Delaware and Easton is my son's name, Easton, Pennsylvania, and transported them now to the Susquehanna. Like, that's interesting too. Like, he's netting 2,000 fish from one fishery and going and bringing them to another fishery.
And I'll tell you that the fisheries are quite different, right, from the forage. Why they share some of the common forage, the fish is different. The Delaware River is a much faster river than the Susquehanna. It's narrower. It's a tad colder, and because of the flow, the smallmouth that survived there tend to be, a little bit more streamlined. They have huge tails for their lengths. Like, a 16-inch fish on the Susquehanna, is wide, right? And a relatively small tail, bigger heads on them, right? And if you look at the fish, they're just, even though they're exactly the same fish through the last, since the 1870s or whenever these programs took place in the late 1800s, the fish have adapted to the ones that survived on here versus the ones that survived on the Delaware. They still have the same barring, but their body shapes are very different.
That's really interesting.
I don't know if you see that on your areas or not, but the Delaware fish are long and lean with these massive tails. And the Susquehanna fish tend to be more lake-like, more football-like. They're by the time they get to that 2.5, 3 pound range, they're much taller than they are longer.
See, like up here, like we get more fish that are, I would say, like the football, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, he's got more shoulders than he has length.
Correct.
And I was talking with a friend down in Virginia, and he was like, well, he actually said this. He goes, actually, our fish are longer. That's why, like, we get 20-inch plus fish, but they're not like they're not the shoulders to what you guys have
Sure, you
up
could
in
have a
Canada.
22 or 23-inch fich that only weighs 4 pounds, right? Where that fish
Exactly.
on your body of water would be pushing 7. So it's just and it's not that the fish is sick. It's not that the fish is old. It's that the fish just has to fight different current, and it chases the food it chases for a living. Like on the Delaware, there's a lot of moving forward. We have shad fry, we have emerald shiners, we have all the daces, the darters, all the blunt nose suckers. We have they're working for their food. We're on the Susquehanna. There's emerging bugs. I mean, every night there's hellgrammites and 7 different species of crayfish, and you can't walk on that river without hearing crayfish being crushed under your feet because they're everywhere.
That's
and
wild.
So I just think that the forage in this river and how slow the river flows, during the normal summer months compared to other rivers like the Delaware, I think it just has created, these runners versus sitters, right? These couch potatoes of bass that sit here in the Susquehanna and just don't have to go more than a few feet to get their fish. I mean, or get their forage. So,
and
it's a very different fishery.
Even like as you go into like you when Thaddeus had moved like from one river to another, you could even talking about the Potomac was very similar way that it was done too, moving fish. But the idea that there was a rail car that was called the Susquehanna,
right?
And that is, I'm sure back then people just there's the fish car, you know what I mean? Like that's
right.
And today, when you think everybody, like I have never personally ever been to the Susquehanna River, but when I hear about the Susquehanna River, I'm like, holy Jesus, like I gotta get down there. Like that's to me, it's like it would be a dream to be able to go out and catch the smallmouth, and a bucket list trip, where back then, oh, there goes the Susquehanna, which is just
at that point in time,
fish car.
Yeah.
Who knew it would be a fishery that would be so, I guess in some ways too, it could have it plus its negatives and its positives, being it's a great fishery, but it draws people from all over now to fish for smallmouth. And it's they weren't even from there. They were brought there,
And the fish that we lost, like I said, I mean, there's ocean run fish that used to make a lot of these, rivers that connected to the Atlantic actually had Atlantic run salmon at one point in time in their histories, right? In their past. And whether it was industrialization or, modernization and building dams that blocked them from getting up, it's just, or the type of water it's not as clean as it was, and the salmon, we know that the salmon needed very, very clean water to do their migration. So it went from being I think there was even a time when the suckers were low on the river, like they had been almost over harvested, right? So you've gone from this great natural fishery that went through an industrial revolution and
very well put.
And the fishery was practically dead to, I'm not going to say clean water acts, but concerned citizens who brought back a fishery, while albeit not salmon, they brought back a extremely fun fish to catch, and it's just thrived. So it's just it's an interesting story. I wish there was more written about it, but it's a great story.
I got it. Like I really got to say, like it like I actually like if you Google it, you'll find it, and I'm gonna actually put this down with the links and everything. But when you look at these fisheries today, and you think about smallmouth fishing, and you think of the Mid-Atlantic as a whole, and you think of like Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, If it didn't have smallmouth,
Well, yeah. I mean, like I said, you just take a look at Pennsylvania. We have
like
we have some nice lakes, but we don't have anything like New York, which is right on our border.
yeah,
And if we didn't have river fishing, right? I mean, we're a very we're we're a very outdoorsy group of people here. So I don't know, there you have your trout fishermen, you have your largemouth fishermen, you have your smallmouth fishermen, you have, people who target. I mean, but Pennsylvania has no salt water, there's no shorelines for salt water. Our lakes are limited. There's not a lot of them. There's a few large man-made lakes that have fish in them, smallmouth to boot. But if it had not been this way, I mean, just look at the revenue some of these smaller towns are bringing in
yeah.
because people are
I was
traveling to come every morning. There's Sheets is full. There's 3 or 4 boats in the parking lot. They're putting fuel in. They're getting their food for the day. They're staying at hotels. They're doing it. I wish there was a way that we could just really not get focused on the money, but just how different life might be if this wasn't here. Like,
yeah, one species of fish, smallmouth bass,
brought in buckets,
yeah,
right? Well, milk cans. It would be neat to see, because I see the small motels and hotels here, and I know that there's enough commerce that goes on, but I also see the boats that are parked out front, and you can just, and if you go in New York during the opening seasons of some of these fisheries, like whether it's walleye season or bass season, you see it yourself. You've got to see it in Canada as well, right? Where you'll see what these tournaments bring in when they bring in not just the people who are in the actual competition, but the support people, the vendors, what they're doing for the local economy, and it's just a really cool kind of story. And sharing this particular species with the Mid-Atlantic states that would not have ever seen these fish, outside of the Great Lakes and the Ohio Basin.
And to be fair, like I think of the people that I know in these states, and I would go, I don't know if I would have crossed paths with them if I wasn't a smallmouth enthusiast. Now, would I sat down and talked with you, Chris? Like I don't know, because I don't know if I would have had a podcast that really is geared for river fishing and smallmouth talk. You know what I mean? Like so like when you think of this, I could only wonder what, Thaddeus Norris is really like, if he's looking down on all of us today, and he's looking at all these fisheries and really what he's started, there's a lot to be said, and I think it's, a lot of these fisheries and those states and its story is so interesting, and I'm sure and if anybody else has any other stories, regarding any of this, send it my way. But I think it's just one of those super interesting topics, because as we talk about tackle, jet boats and kayaks and, the next best lure, the best rod,
all fun topics.
I like that stuff, but sometimes I kind of want to understand why it is what it is today. You know what I mean? Right. And
you could, if you just take a look at, fishing line development, rod blank development, the history of some of these soft plastics. And I just know that, at a 15-year-old, when I was 15, there wasn't a lot of options. There was a few great bait companies out there, Mann's Bait Company and a few others that were out there when I was 15 years old, but you were literally stuck to cardstock type lures, things you would pull off of.
Okay.
The manufacturers would staple them to a card and, stamp their name on it. And you would buy, Mann's Worm, or you would buy, Mr. Twister Curltail, or I remember a lot of these lures that are now, everybody makes a tube, but I remember when that tube first came out, right? And or everybody makes a creature bait, but I remember when some of these creature baits came out, and right now there's dozens of manufacturers that make them from all different types of, floating plastics, sinking plastics, plastisol versus Lastec, hard baits, soft baits. I mean, there's just so much out there that, it's a great piece of our fishing history when you look back and look at just how far the reels have come, how far spinning reels have come, how far casting reels have come. Marginally better than when I was 15, right? I mean, there's not even the same thing. They don't even look the same. But just, if my grandfather was still alive, to go back and look at what his first fishing, I have a couple of his old fishing reels and some metal rods. I mean, can you imagine an aluminum fishing rod? The thing's terrible. And some of the fiberglass stuff that these guys were catching doing some crazy things with some pretty poor fishing gear, right? It's just, there's so much to this that goes back, and not even just, you mentioned it. You had netters or people who are fishing for food, and then you had your elite sportsmen that were part of either royalty, or you weren't even allowed to fish for these things because that stream belonged to somebody else. And now we can just go out and do it, right?
And there's so much more out there. Like, you could literally go on Google and type in, or go on YouTube and type, how do I catch a smallmouth? And I guarantee there's probably like 8 million videos on how to catch a smallmouth. So you're probably going to be there a while. But, when you think of it, there's magazines, there's, internet websites that are in forums and groups on Facebook and social media.
And part of the the writing, the logging, the fishing, doing the things, those are all great. But being able, as you mentioned, because you have a 13-year-old son that's been fishing with you for a decade now, it's fun to watch it through their eyes and watch them get excited and turned on about it, because I have my own children now. I have grandchildren that are doing it, and it's funny because they're just as excited as I was. And I'll talk to some of their friends, or they'll talk to their friends and say, "Oh, you've never been fishing before?" It's like, so it's opening it up, and you never know the impact that you have on the water when you're on the water. Not necessarily to creating new fisheries or creating a new lure, or inventing a new substrate that can make our rods even better or lighter or more sensitive, but just what you can do in the lives of other people. Like I said, you never know what someone else is going on in their lives.
Exactly.
And just putting them on the water and giving them that day, or giving them that moment with a friend that they haven't seen for years, or the people that they get together. I have college roommates that get together. They're in their 60s or 70s now, but they get together to go smallmouth fishing,
wicked,
once a year. And it started out where they would do these boundary water canoe things. Canoe things.
Oh, in the boundary waters. Okay.
Yeah. And then they got kayaks. And as they got older, they realized, well, I can't sit down in a kayak or a canoe, at 70 years old anymore. They transitioned into the guiding thing. But it's always about fishing. And it's one of those great things, because to me, it's not, you can be from almost any religious situation, any political stance. And while you might have some fun, flare-ups in the boat, calling each other names for fun, the fishing kind of is that one piece that brings them together in that moment, because they can both celebrate, no matter what their differences are, no matter, economical, cultural. It's just I've seen it happen. I've seen people who were, they've been fishing their entire lives, and they could hit, a bucket from 50 feet, 9 out of 10 times, to the guy that can hardly keep his bait out of the trees, enjoying the exact same moment on the exact same boat, doing the exact same thing in a very different way. Yeah. And it's just amazing how it does it. And would we have that opportunity if it wouldn't have been for somebody like Thaddeus that said, you know what, I think I want to do? I think I want to take this pretty hard, pretty big chunk of money and risk it all and trying to get some of these fish into this river to see what it does. And there's no way you
could have bettered, like, what a self selfless act to actually go and say, you know, I could have taken that money and at that time I could have been very rich. So, and then instead I'm going to go and invest it into these smallmouth at 25 cents a piece, and I'm going to put them on a rail car,
Yeah, and I
and
think
I'm going to move them.
go back to that thing. And I'm sorry for cutting you off, but just the whole thing that culturally, stocking wasn't a huge piece. I mean, yes, there was a little bit of stocking, but we didn't. The fisheries management wasn't what it is today. The idea of being able to get these fish here, there had to be a significant amount of risk and a lack of knowledge, but just enough to get them here. But can you imagine getting the investors, getting the people to do the trip with you, having people, standing ready to, hey, we got to get these fish in here, and it's just a smallmouth. It's just these fish that,
Back before contracts, it was all just a good handshake,
Yeah. But it's just like you said, it's an interesting story, and I'm thankful that it happened. But and I remind people when they hear that railroad sign, or they look at pictures of where the canals used to be, or you're now walking on canal paths, or you've got rail paths, and canals are still, they're not functioning anymore, but there's still a lot of the canals are along these rivers, or there's a piece of them where there's a piece of historical placard that shows what this canal does. Without those canals, without those railroads, without that whole piece, it would not have shrunk not only shrunk the country or countries, right?
Yeah.
It made commerce and travel and everything else much easier, but it also brought smallmouth to everybody, because you'd have had to travel. You'd have had to travel to get to them. And a lot of the lower 48, not everybody's connected to the Great Lakes.
Nope. And now, thank you for Thaddeus Norris. That when you think of it, a lot of the lower 48, you're connected by what? Smallmouth. You know what I mean? Like, there's a somebody has a home there, talks about smallmouth, got into smallmouth fishing, comes up, and this story like this. Chris, I want to say thank you so much for stopping on by the River Run podcast. I really appreciate this. I like I said, I was really taken by this article. This is I always love history, and this being a really interesting topic. And like, if you have any socials, anything, let people know where they can find you. I'll make sure to add all that in the description down below. But take it away, man.
Listen, I don't need to sell anything right now. I think I love the podcast. I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
It's about getting people on the water, and there's, pretty much you have this in your backyard, courtesy of those, those people who put them there for us. And whether you get a guide or get a kayak or have a buddy who can take you out, the important part is to give it a try. If you haven't done it before, give it a try. It's a lot of fun, and especially for you do not have to be an adult. You do not have to be super knowledgeable, and as you mentioned, you don't have to put a lot of money into it either. You can go to a lot of local shops, and they can help you get set up and have a day on the water with your kids or with your family.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's all about having fun. It's all about getting out there, and that's how you create memories. And memories are everlasting. And this passion for smallmouth fishing, just like Chris and I don't think I would be sitting here having a conversation with Chris if I didn't learn anything about this whole idea of the American fly fishing father of Thaddeus Norris had done, back in the 1800s. What would it be today? It's always an interesting one. But yes, my guest tonight, Chris Gorsuch, is a Susquehanna River guide. I appreciate his editing, journalism, and also a fantastic article, which I will list down in the description, is The Origin of the Smallmouth Story. You'll be able to find it there. If you haven't read it, check it out. It's a quick article that was written back in April of 2024. I'm a little slow getting to it, but at the end of the day, I'm your host, Adam Pross. This is the River Run Podcast. And don't forget, you can check out the River Run Podcast on YouTube. And it is also on Spotify, which you're listening to now. Drop a comment anytime. And I thank you, all my listeners. And I thank my guest tonight, Chris Gorsuch, as a phenomenal guest for a phenomenal story. And we will see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Paddle and Fin Podcast Network. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget, for future shows, like, follow, share, and hit that subscribe button. Make sure you check out our individual channels and accounts too. Want to be a guest on one of our shows and talk of adventures, gear, or products? Contact us. Thank you for watching The Noob Show with Matt Gibson, Chasing the Tide with Dustin Nichols, The Rusty Hook with John Rapp, The River Run with Adam Fraser Pross, May Contain Fishing with Daniel Woodcock, Chasing the 20s with Carlisle Esterly and Sean Lavery, Friday Night Bites with Brian Schiller. Thanks for tuning into the Paddle and Fin Network. Subscribe and always